Good morning, everyone. Today, as all of you know, my name is Megan Williams, and it's January is Alzheimer's Awareness Month. This year, AGI features a series of lectures, and today is our final lecture of the series. The lectures are there to raise awareness and demystify misconceptions of Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. AGI supports people living with dementia and their families. Our services include in-person and online activities for people living with dementia, individual and family counseling, education, workshops, and lectures, as well as support groups for family caregivers. Today's lecture is made possible by the generous support of the Lasner Learning Center. AGI is a charitable organization, and we rely on the support of donations. This is a free lecture, but you are welcome to donate at any time by calling us or visiting our website. Today's lecture, everyone will be on mute, and you can use a Q&A or the chat function at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. At the end of the presentation, either Nin, our outreach coordinator, or I will be reading questions to Dr. Hornberger. So for today's webinar, we have the privilege to present Dr. Michael Hornberger, who is going to speak about dementia risk reduction. Dr. Michael Hornberger is a professor of Applied Dementia Research at Norwich, I hope I said that right, Medical School, and the Associate Dean of Innovation, Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences. His research focuses on improving diagnosis, disease progression tracking, and symptom management in dementia. His current research is particularly focused on spatial orientation and navigation deficits in dementia, and how this has an impact on people's outdoor activities, such as driving and walking safely. He is also the author of the book, Tangled Up, The Science and History of Alzheimer's Disease. So without further ado, Dr. Hornberger, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for the very kind introduction, and pleasure to join you from the UK, where it's afternoon. So you have still all the day ahead of you, so you're very bright, hopefully. So I'm talking today about how can we really reduce our risk for dementia. I'll talk a little bit about this. So I'm not talking actually about my work on getting lost for a change, but I can talk about this maybe separately another time. So I'm just going to change my screen view. So can we reduce our risk for dementia? And well, if you don't want to listen to my whole talk, the short answer is yes. That's the good answer. So we can definitely reduce our risk for dementia. So it's a really important message we need to get across to people, because many people, as you know, will not want to be diagnosed or want to know their risk for dementia, because they say, well, what can I do about it? There's no medication available. But that actually is not correct. So there are actually a lot of ways how we can reduce our risk for dementia quite significantly. And I will go through some of these factors in today's lecture. And yeah, please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. I'm very happy. I left plenty of time for questions later. So let's start off. Actually, I'll start off with the most common question I get asked in public talks is, what is the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? So first we need to know what's the difference to actually understand how we can reduce the risk of dementia. And we have to see as dementia as kind of an umbrella term, I would call it, under which there's several diseases. Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia with Lewy bodies. There's several other types of dementia, but these are the 4 top types of dementia, and I've ranked them by how common they are, with Alzheimer's disease being the most common form of dementia, followed by vascular dementia, frontal dementia, and dementia with Lewy bodies. Now, the reason why people get very often dementia and Alzheimer's disease mixed up is that Alzheimer's disease is nearly 3/4 of all dementias. So when people very often talk about dementia, they actually mean Alzheimer's disease. Then another 20% of vascular dementia, and all the other dementias then have around 10%. So we just need to understand that Alzheimer's disease is one type of dementia, but the most common one. So today, I'm actually going to talk about all of these dementias, so Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, and all other types of dementias, because the risk reduction, we do not have yet specific risk reduction strategy for specific dementias. The most important factor is to understand which factors actually affect our dementia risk, because that will really inform how we can reduce our risk. And there's quite a few very large scale studies now out there which really look at across our whole life course which factors will determine whether we are at increased risk. So if we're looking at, just change to my pointer. So we're just looking from childhood all the way to late life. We have a whole range where we can basically might have life factors affecting our dementia risk. And for example, we have positive factors which reduce our risk for dementia. And one is physical activity, cognitive activity, and social activity. And I'll come back to all of those. And then another one seems to be education, in particular in early life, which is still quite a controversial topic. And I'm very happy to discuss this later. What does this mean? Why is potentially education in early life reducing our risk for dementia? At the same time, we have many factors which can increase our risk for dementia. And in particular, conditions like hypertension, so high blood pressure, obesity, so being very overweight, or dyslipidemia, which is means that there is, we, for example, have high cholesterol, definitely increase our risk for dementia. I'll come back to this. Then we have, of course, genetic risk factors, and of which one the most common is called ApoE, and other kind of familial kind of changes. Now, I'd say straight away, the genetic components are actually the least important. I think people always are very afraid that they have a family member who had dementia and hence do have their genes and will therefore develop dementia. That's actually really rare to happen. So we all have some sort of genes which either increase or decrease our risk for dementia, but that you really inherit the genes from your parents or other family members. It's actually very, very rare, and in less than 1% of all people with dementia the case. So for example, I had a grandmother who had dementia. It's very unlikely that I inherited the risk from her. But again, I'm very happy to talk about the genetics later. What's far more important is our lifestyle. Our lifestyle makes a huge difference to how we increase our risk for dementia. Having an unhealthy diet, drinking too much alcohol, smoking, having diabetes type 2, have all increase our risk for dementia significantly. And depression is another really interesting factor, which is much more the mental health aspect, which also has been shown to really relate to whether we have an increased risk for dementia later on. So let's go through some of these factors, and let's start really with the physical health risk factors, which are, some of them are mentioned already. And the important thing to understand is that really you have to think about the heart and the brain as one system. So our brain is only around 2% of our body weight, but it uses 20% of our body's energy and oxygen. So it's extremely active, our brain, and therefore needs a lot of blood and oxygen and sugar or glucose to use. Therefore, the blood supply is really vital to the brain. How we get blood into our brain and how it's kind of used is really important. So key message to remember for you is what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And that's really key to many of the physical health factors. If you have very good heart health or cardiovascular health, how we usually call this, it's very likely you have a very good brain health. And that can really reduce your risk for dementia as well. Now, how about this whole physical health? How does this affect it? I show mostly data for England or the UK, but the same will apply for Canada. So in Canada, in the UK, we have around 7 million people and a smoke of around 60 million people living here. And it's the single largest cause of preventable ill health and premature death. And it's responsible for 16% of all death in people aged 35 plus. So it is a huge, huge factor. So reducing smoking is one of the key factors how we can actually change our cardiovascular risk. So if you smoke as well, your risk for dementia is significantly increased, and that's known for a long, long time. Similarly, alcohol are really an important factor, how much alcohol that many people drink at an increasing risk and a higher risk. And it's very interesting. We see an increase here always of alcohol-related dementia. And these are not people, very often people think of alcohol more problem with alcoholics. But we see this as also a factor which applies to many people. You would not assume that, who are perfectly functioning jobs or had functioning jobs and are fairly educated and so on. But it's the kind of alcohol is so pervasive in our society that it's quite easy that we drink too much alcohol. And 1 in 10 patients have an emergency alcohol-specific readmission within 30 days following an alcohol-specific admission. So many people go back to the hospital as a really big issue with alcohol. Blood pressure is the other one which I mentioned already, hypertension. So in the UK, in England, it's more than 1 in 4 adults has high blood pressure. And it's the 3rd biggest risk factor for premature death and disability in England after smoking and a poor diet. And this is really at least half of all heart attacks and strokes are associated with high blood pressure. It's a major risk factor for chronic disease, chronic kidney disease, heart failure, and dementia. The reason for this is that the high blood pressure causes not only major strokes, but also minor strokes in the brain. And these minor strokes, which are either caused by blood vessel rupturing or leaking or getting blocked, is a key factor which accelerates the dementia process. How this exactly happens is not yet completely explored, but what we know is that these kind of mini strokes, which are called, can increase our risk for dementia significantly. So controlling our blood pressure is a very, very important factor we can do. And of course, this can be all done either via lifestyle changes, or of course there is medication out there. But as always, it's better prevention than treatment, as always in life. And if we just reduce basically our blood pressure by 10 millimeter over then basically it will reduce the risk of major cardiovascular events by 20%. So this is an enormous impact one can have with a very, very small change directly. If we reduce our blood pressure via lifestyle or medication, then we can reduce our risk for cardiovascular events and therefore dementia as well significantly. Now, nutrition and diet is a big, big topic. And the key factors for living healthily is really to reduce salt, because salt, of course, is one of the big drivers as well for blood pressure. And the more salt we consume, the more likely we are going to have high blood pressure. And that, of course, as you know now already, increases our risk for strokes or mini strokes and dementia. One thing with reducing salt, I always say one needs to be very careful, in particular for ready meals. Ready meals are famous for having a lot of salt. So if you have ready meals, just check the salt content. The others, of course, reduce portion sizes. And this really, it goes back to having a healthy body. If you can, eat a smaller portion size. And increase the content of fruit and vegetables and fiber, which are all really good for us. And reduce fats and frying practices. And of course, reduce sugar. I think everybody is aware these days that sugar is not good for us, and we should try to reduce it as much as possible. That's a key aspect. Now, in terms of, this is just in general for health, and nearly everybody knows these kind of health recommendations. But how about dementia-specific recommendations for diet? And there are many studies at the moment ongoing which look at specific dietary patterns and if they can reduce our risk for dementia. Now, the diet which has so far shown the strongest evidence for reducing our risk for dementia is the Mediterranean diet. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to move to the Mediterranean, but it's basically adopting a type of more Mediterranean type style diet. And there are many studies actually ongoing at the moment to explore how we can use in different cultures, how can we adopt potentially a Mediterranean style diet. Now, the key thing in the Mediterranean style diet is that there's a lot of whole grains and a lot of virgin olive oil basically consumed, and a lot of pulses as well. Then there's a large proportion of vegetables. Actually here are the pulses, of course. Lots of oily fish, and then actually much less dairy and very little red meat. If then there is actually white meat, so poultry is more consumed, but which is very different to the classic, I guess, Western diet where we eat a lot of red meat, usually are very dairy heavy, while the Mediterranean diet has a very different food pyramid. So if you just look up Mediterranean diet in Google, you can find a lot of examples which are really good. And in the end, this is again all about being healthy, and has, as I said, the Mediterranean diet has really good evidence, scientific evidence to reduce our risk for dementia. Which brings us to weight, of course. This is again numbers for England, and in 2015, 63 adults in England were overweight or obese. And this just shows that we here still live through, I think, you know, we're all familiar now with epidemics and pandemics, but I think the other we're living through is at the moment that we live through an obesity epidemic or pandemic worldwide, that in rich countries, people will just get much larger, and overall weight is not a good thing to gain. Of course, the older we get, we all carry a few pounds, so it's nothing to worry about. But I think when we go into what we call the obese range, is really, we need to be really, really careful. And the obesity really in adults rose from around 15% to nearly 27% over these kind of 20 years. And that's still increasing at the moment. So for us, the kind of distribution changes from underweight, healthy weight, we have a much larger proportion overweight, obese, or morbidly obese people. And especially these obese and morbidly obese people are really increasing. And what's really concerning at the moment for us is that we're seeing many more children actually being obese and morbidly obese, which of course is very bad for the general adult life development. And with that, with obesity, very often goes hand in hand type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes is something you need to be very, very careful about. If you have it, you need to really be careful that you regulate your blood sugar as best as you can, because what we can see, if the blood sugar gets dysregulated, that really increases the risk for dementia significantly. So people with type 2 diabetes have a very, very high risk of developing dementia later on if their blood sugar is not properly regulated by medication. It's therefore important to get it early diagnosed with your family doctor. And once, if you have a diagnosis, to regulate your blood sugar really, really carefully. Of course, weight also increases our risk for higher blood pressure. Basically, our heart, to accommodate for a bigger body, our heart needs to basically pump much harder. And it does this by basically increasing the blood pressure. So by becoming bigger, we also increase our risk for strokes and dementia. So in general, try to stay within a weight which is in the normal range or overweight range. But if you go into the obese or morbidly obese range, you really start to see very, very significant changes in terms of risk for heart disease, stroke, but also dementia. So that's really important to remember. Then physical activity. I think physical activity is a very interesting topic. People think always, when they think of physical activity, they think of active sport, and that you have to do sport to be physically active. And of course, it counts as one of them, being active sport, which can mean an organized sport. For example, you're in a club playing some kind of sport, or an informal sport where you just do something yourself. But physical activity is much wider. It also includes what we call active recreation, where you go for walks, or active travel, where you travel either on foot or by bicycle, for example, or you just have a very active lifestyle where you just be all the time on your feet doing things. This all counts as physical activity. All these activities are really important for reducing our risk for dementia. So don't think that you have to run a marathon or anything like that. If you just have an active recreation or active lifestyle or active travel, you're already doing a lot for your brain health and for reducing your risk for dementia. And that's really important to remember, because again, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. So we need to remember that. So how much should we do, basically? So in the UK, it's we should at least aim for 150 minutes of moderate intensity per week, basically. This can also be achieved by 75 minutes of vigorous activity across each week, or a mixture of moderate and vigorous. And I always, of course, people have these days, and I carry myself, I'm not sure you can see this, have smartwatches. So with the smartwatch, you can track that very easily, whether you do, how many minutes you do, how much moderate or how vigorous activity you do. But if you don't have a smartwatch, how do you tell if you're doing moderate or vigorous activity? And there is a kind of a really interesting, kind of very simple trick to find out. So if you basically, the key is if you can either talk or sing still while doing an activity. That sounds a bit bizarre, but I explain it. So if you would just go for a very gentle walk along, you could still talk to somebody walking beside you, or you could sing or whistle. So that would be basically actually neither moderate nor vigorous activity. However, if you do moderate activity, you can still talk to somebody next to you, but it would be very hard for you to sing or to whistle. So you can imagine you're talking to somebody while really more like power walking, and you can still do conversation with them maybe, but you wouldn't want to go sing or whistle while doing that. It would be very hard for you. Now, vigorous activity, you can neither talk or sing or whistle, basically, because you're going so fast, and very likely you would be jogging by that stage. If you wanted to have a conversation with somebody, it would be just very short sentences or words you would just say in between your breath, because it would be very hard, but it would be not long sentences. So that's a good kind of thing to remember, whether you can still talk or sing or whistle. So it's really just a shortcut. Now, many people also, the recommendation is not only to be physically active, like we talked about walking, for example, or cycling, or if you're raking the leaves, you know, we always say to our people, you know, maybe you should leave the leaf blower away, instead get the old rake out, and it gives you a fantastic cardiovascular workout. But the other thing is also to do muscle strengthening activity. So this is more the muscles in our center of our body, which are really important for us to keep healthy as well. And you can do that, of course, exercising with weights, but you can also do other things like yoga or Pilates, or even carrying heavy shopping, of course, is really kind of really good for that. And the key why this is good for our health is that it really strengthens our musculoskeletal system. We're less likely to fall, which is a big risk factor when we age. If you want to take one take-home message, then it is this: minimize the amount of time spending sitting for extended periods. And of course, there's quite an irony, because I'm sitting now talking to you, very likely you're all sitting there. But if we can reduce our amount of sitting, this is key. Being on our feet, being active, will all contribute to our active lifestyle, and it's something we should really remember. Then what counts as moderate physical activity? We can really go for walks, we can do gardening, Tai Chi is here given as an example, dancing, swimming, active recreation, or cycling. There's so many options. It's just not that you don't have to be a sports person to be physically active. And that's really important to remember, because I think it's so vital that we just keep active when we age. And I see this with my parents all the time, and that's really, really interesting to see. And they know their risk, and I know their risk. And it really needs to be coming out of us that we're really active still. Now, physical activity, of course, also helps us with our mental health. Sorry, I'll come back to this in a second. Now, just to say, regular physical activity reduces our health risk on an enormous scale. So people always underestimate this. This is just a range for different kind of diseases. Cognitive decline here relates a lot to dementia, but also to stroke. So it's a mixture. So I'll come back later to the risk for dementia specifically. But this is the total. You can see if you're physically active, you reduce your risk of stroke or dementia by up to 40%. So these are huge numbers, which basically any medication would struggle to achieve. But you also reduce your risk of diabetes type 2, hypertension, any kind of mortality, bone fractures, again, falls are really important. even breast cancer, coronary heart disease, and colorectal cancer. Yeah, the numbers are really huge. The other factor which is enormously reduced is depression. And that brings us very nicely to the next, which is the mental health risk factors. And this comes very often to people as a surprise that our mental health makes such a big impact on actually our risk for dementia, in general, our mortality. But we really need to look out for these kind of changes, how we feel. If we're feeling low or feeling irritable, restless or tense, guilty or worthless or hopeless or numb or isolated, and you feel like the bad things will happen to you, or you're tired all the time. Mind you, in winter, that's very often a hard time, of course, because we feel more tired, or that we don't have any pleasure in things we used to enjoy. I think these are all warning signs we need to really pick up on, either on ourselves or, or on the people around us. And then it's really also not only how we feel, but what we do. So if we start worrying a lot, or if we're starting to avoid social activities, constantly worrying about our health, or having difficulty speaking or thinking clearly or making decisions, and are unable to relax or eat or sleep more than or less than usual. These are all warning signs that something is amiss with our mental health, and we should really look for a healthcare professional, either your family doctor or nurse, who can basically, you can talk to and explore whether there are factors that might be really impacting on that. And finally, there are a lot of physical factors as well. It's that we have physical aches or pains with no obvious physical cause, moving very slowly, restless and agitated, pins and needles a lot, faster breathing, lightheaded. You have a fast thumping or regular heartbeat, or sweating, or experience hot flushes, or having panic attacks, even though that's very rare, you have to say. But these are, we can see, so these are different factors that how we feel, changes what we do, and changes within our body. If we have all three of those, this is really a warning sign that our mental health is not well. And I think it's really that we keep our mental health good. And as I said, physical activity is very good for this, staying socially connected, but also to really be mentally active. If we want our brain to stay in peak condition, we should use it. It's the classic use it or lose it. So we need to stay active, need to be basically engaged. We all love a day in front of the TV watching things, but you need to get off the couch or the sofa and switch the TV off and do something with your brain from time to time. And people who do more mentally stimulating activities have better thinking skills in old age. So there's plenty of scientific evidence for this. So we need to keep mentally active. Question is, well, how do you do that? And very often, of course, people tell me, well, I'm still doing crosswords for the last 30 years. And I say, that's great, but maybe you should do something new. And in particular, basically try to do something new and learn something new. And the only caveat, I would say, be wary of what's called like brain training programs or apps. So these days you can find hundreds of brain training programs or apps which tell you how to get a fitter brain, a better brain, a healthier brain, and so on. The scientific evidence so far for these programs apps is very limited so far as to whether they work or not. I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to find out more why they don't seem to work. But just be very wary if somebody tells you that this is doing this program will make your brain healthy. Instead, to maintain your thinking skills is really what we always say, stay socially engaged via hobbies or activities. Being socially engaged is hugely mentally stimulating for us, and we always forget that. And I have to say this, I have to admit this myself, very often, of course, men are worse than women in terms of being socially engaged. And my wife always tells me I need to get out more there. So we just need to overcome that. Be more engaged is really socially stimulating. And if this is just going to, I don't know, a hockey match with friends, or I don't know, going for a drink, but just a small drink, of course, or going for a walk, I think it can be is really, really good for keeping our mind going. The other thing which we always think is to have a purpose. This becomes a particular issue when people retire, and very often their work was a large part of their life's purpose. We always find that people who do either some mentoring, volunteering, or care work do much, much better. And that, there's a whole range, of course, of how one can do that, and that those people are usually staying much more mentally active. And then coming back to this, it's learning something new. And so if you've always done crosswords, well, maybe it is time to do Sudoku, or Wordle seems to be the new thing that everybody is doing. So just think about it. Of course, you can make lots of jokes here about old books and new tricks, but it's really that simple. Learn something new. And if you want to learn something new, well, why don't you learn something new which is also socially engaging, maybe, and gives you some physical activity, like joining a choir is perfect for that. Very physically demanding, new social engagement, or do a sport or learn an instrument, anything you want to do. It's hard, but it would definitely keep your brain going. So now you know a lot about the risk factors. So how can we actually reduce our risk for dementia? And what are the top tips, I guess, for that? It should be really it's pretty obvious that you should avoid smoking. And I think it's really key that if you stop smoking, this really reduces your risk for dementia significantly, just because it changes your cardiovascular health significantly. It's never too late. And again, from my own experience, from my own family, some family members still smoke in their old age. They tell me, well, it doesn't matter now anyway. Well, it does. So it doesn't matter how old you are, it will make, if you stop smoking, it will make within a few weeks, if not months, it will make a significant difference to your cardiovascular health. So it's never too late. Keep your cholesterol and blood pressure in check. I think measuring cholesterol levels is really important. And of course, your GP nurse can do this. There's even home measuring kits, which some are less reliable than others. So it's always worth investigating which is best. But blood pressure, you can even do that at home. These days, one can buy a blood pressure machine, can measure it very easily. Just don't get worried about having one high reading. It's more about that you have a consistent kind of good reading. And of course, you can talk to your doctor about this. For cholesterol and blood pressure, there's also excellent medication which can regulate that. And the science shows that if you have it very well regulated via medication, you do not increase your risk. But it's again the undiagnosed high cholesterol and undiagnosed high blood pressure which increases your risk for dementia. So keep that in check is really important. Well, I've already said this, be physically active. It's really, and you don't have to train for a marathon to keep your brain happy. It's really just keep active and try to do these 150 minutes of exercise a week. That's roughly 30 minutes a day for 5 days, if you can manage that. And that's really moderate activity while having maybe a brisk walk. So don't do just gentle walking, do a brisk walk or go cycling, or I don't know. There's so many options. Play with the grandchildren, that will definitely get your heart pumping. Stay connected. The social engagement, it's becoming more and more data out for this, how critical it is to actually stay healthy. And this is much more about our mental health, but it will keep our brain active. And that has been shown to really be also a very important risk factor for dementia. So if you can join any hobby groups, meet friends, or keep the social interaction possible, I think that's really key. So try to do that as best as possible. Eat well and aim for balance. Eating a well-balanced diet is one of the best ways, as it says here, to reduce your risk for several conditions, but even dementia. I think reducing fat in our diet is important, but it doesn't mean that, that all fats are bad. And that's why I didn't mention them before. For example, in oily fish or nuts or seeds or avocados, that actually these are good fats. And it's usually having a good balance of fruit, vegetables, pulses, and fish and high fiber complex every week. So a lot of these, as you can see, are very, as I said to you already before, the Mediterranean diet has been shown to be very, very good with this. And it's always to have, I think, a really healthy, balanced diet. You can judge it very simply by looking at your plate and very often seeing how many colors do I have on my plate. If it's very beigey, very often, there's a lot of beige colors, it's very likely not very healthy food. But if you have a lot of different colors on your plate, it will be in general a really good thing. Just as I said before, one issue as well, if you eat a lot of ready meals, just be careful. Ready meals can have a lot of salt in it, and the salt can really increase your risk for high blood pressure. So just be wary with the ready meals, or just check on them. Keep your brain active and exercised. Staying mentally and socially active is really, keeps you going basically. And you can do anything you want. As I said, do your crossword puzzles if you want to, do brain teasers or playing an instrument. As I said, learning something new is a key aspect to keep your brain healthy. And just be a bit wary of the brain apps or brain programs, brain training programs. As I said, keep an eye on the drinking. And this is, of course, always a big factor, but drinking is known to, especially alcohol, to increase our risk for dementia quite significantly. So there are actually something called alcohol-related dementia, which is on the rise. And the reason for this is that it's affecting actually specific brain regions, which are very important for our memory. So we need to be quite careful with this. So in the UK, it's that basically, the recommendation is that you should not have more than 14 units a week. And so a good way to cut back on drinking is to have at least 3 drink-free days in a row each week. And so if you need to know what the units are, so 14 units are around 7 pints of beer or cider, or 9 small glasses of wine. This is across the whole week. So it's just important to remember that. Which brings us, I think, to really some of the final slides I just want to say, because the other final thing that people are worried about, well, what is actually then the difference between age and dementia? What should I be worried about that I have the first signs of dementia? And a really good thing to talk about is that what are usual age-related changes and what are possible signs of dementia? And so, for example, forgetting appointments but remembering them later is perfectly fine for age-related changes, and frankly happens to me every day. But forgetting important dates repeatedly, that's much more a warning sign. Sometimes forgetting the right word for things. I have so many people telling me that they're really worried about this. I cannot remember this, or I cannot remember the actor of this movie, or we watched this movie and I can't remember which other movies the director made. It happens to all of us. It's really just the longer we live our life, the more we have stored in our memory, so we might forgetting some things. But if you stop mid-conversation or really struggling with words, then this is much more a warning sign. You need to be careful. Forgetting where you put your glasses occasionally is, again, that's how things are. It's very often that's the case. I think in particular, very often people tell me they get really worried when they say, oh, I've walked into another room, or I've walked on top of the stairs and then I've forgotten completely why I went there. Do I have dementia? And the good news is, no, you don't, because what happens usually in those circumstances is that while you walked to the other room or up the stairs, you thought of something else you need to do. And again, this happens to me every day, that I keep other things in my mind, and then basically I can't remember why I did this or why. But this is completely normal. We call these more problems with attention, so attention and memory problems, but they're completely normal. Everybody has them. However, if you're really putting items in unusual places or getting lost in unfamiliar places, that's really much more a warning sign. And very often that's one of the first signs the family reports that, for example, a person empties the dishwasher and then puts the crockery into very strange places where they've never been to. And that's very, very unusual, basically. And that's very often a warning sign for dementia, which requires to be followed up. Some people can also make bad decisions sometimes, which is, again, that's how it happens in healthy aging. But if you show a poor judgment that's out of character, then this is something much more to worry about. And then becoming irritable now and then, well, again, I need to look just in the mirror for myself on that. But if you have really changes in your mood or personality, this is much more a warning sign that something is amiss. And this might not be dementia. For example, mood changes could be a potential sign of depressive symptoms or full depression, and that's of course treatable. And very often people with depression have very poor memory, so people get very worried that they have dementia, but then they get a diagnosis of depression and get treated for the depression, and the memory symptoms disappear as well. It's really just too important to follow those symptoms up. If you have them, then see your family doctor or nurse to really know what's going on. Now, just to really conclude with this, the incredible thing is that all the risk factors we talked about is that 3/4 of people are unaware that they can affect their risk of developing dementia. So with all of these lifestyle factors we talked about, you can really reduce your risk of dementia by up to 40%. So this is huge, basically. It's huge changes we can just affect by changing our lifestyle. And we can also, of course, investigate any medication or statins or with our diabetes. And again, it's worth talking to our doctors, but just changing your lifestyle slightly. And this doesn't mean that you need to reinvent yourself now as a marathon running vegan. It's really just tweaking it, and just living slightly healthier will make a big, big difference in the long term. And that's really the key, to be long-term thinking, making small changes which you can stick to over the long term. I think that's really important. And I really like this kind of key healthy aging factors slide, which really shows you that productive healthy aging, as it's called here, you know, there is factors like financial security, which people have, of course, and that's always good to have, but that you have a meaning and a purpose is really important. That you stay connected. Social isolation is, of course, a big factor. That your physical health keeps in check, and that you have a mental resilience and that you keep mentally active. It's really, really important. All these factors really help you to be healthy aging, and will allow you to live have a really good quality of life. But if you just want to remember one thing from this whole talk, then just remember what's good for the heart is good for the brain. It's really the key message, which it really will make a big, big difference to you. As I said before, don't think about reinventing your whole lifestyle. Make small changes, but stick to them and make them healthier. And I just wanted to thank you. And it was very kind. You already mentioned that I wrote a book called Tangled Up, and it has the science and history of Alzheimer's disease. So this is specific then on Alzheimer's disease. There's one chapter only on genetics and lifestyle and how we can actually change them. It explains more in detail how the lifestyle is actually, how these lifestyle factors affect our risk for dementia. But it also goes into the history, which people very often don't know, who Alois Alzheimer, the person actually who found the disease, how he discovered it. And if you don't want my book, you can find it on Amazon Canada, I'm pretty sure. But I also have a website called Dementia Science. If you want to go there, then you can read or publish regularly articles on different topics, which just explains the science again behind it and what does it actually mean. And I really go into much more detail than how to understand, for example, risk factors, but any other kind of factors. And I'm very happy for people to write me and suggest any topics they want me to cover. And with that, I think I leave it at that, and I think we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hornberger. I think right now we're all sitting here trying to see what we're going to do during our lunch hour, how to start
we first should stand up, I guess, and walk a bit.
Do some squats, we're good. I just wanted to ask a few questions. So you said towards the end that making small changes now could be helpful. So is it too late to start? I mean, we're talking if you've lived a not so healthy lifestyle and you're 50, or you're now 65 and you've really never been physically active, or you had too many glasses of wine, can you make a difference by doing those small changes now?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the key message, really. We can, if you make these changes, our body is incredibly adaptive to any kind of changes we're putting in. And as I said, if you, for example, change these things, then within a few months, you will see significant changes. This is gradual, though. We have to be careful. It's not about doing sudden, drastic things, because you don't want to injure yourself or be bad for your health. So it's always important to talk it through with a healthcare professional, obviously. But doesn't matter how old you are, you can make a difference, and it will make a difference in the long term. So that's a key message, whether you're 50, 70, 80, 90, I don't know, it really depends. But, you know, to have those kind of key messages. But if you made it to 90, I guess you would have been already very, very healthy. So
you did a good job.
Exactly.
I also wanted to ask, you gave kind of a number of 150 minutes, I think it was, a week of some type of physical activity. Now, does that number vary depending on the person's age?
Yes, that's a very good question. So this was usually for people who are older, it will take much more into account how their physical health in general, of course. So it's always important talking to a healthcare professional, because you don't want to go off if you have, for example, a lot of physical health condition already, that it needs to be really talked through with a healthcare professional. But in general, it's a good number to aim for, regardless of any age, as long as you don't stress yourself out to achieve this number. As always, these numbers are, in the end, are recommendations. It's not about that you have to hit this number necessarily. It's the same with the 10,000 steps, which people always say. And of course, it's completely an arbitrary number. In the end, it's all about just being less sedentary, being more active. And that's the important thing, I think.
Okay. Nin, did you have a question?
There were a couple of questions asking whether learning something on the internet or reading a book is enough. And also, is meditation helpful for brain health?
Yes, great questions. So first of all, in terms of reading something on the internet, yes, well, if you learn something new, I think that's good. But maybe that's not reading the news, because it's not good for our blood pressure in general, reading the news. But I think learning something on the internet, for example, if you want to learn, I don't know, these days you can watch, of course, anything on the internet. It's impossible. It's, you know, incredible what we can learn. That's perfectly fine, as long as it's something active. So once we start being more passive, so if you do something passive viewing, or being more passive in terms of your interaction with what you do, then you have much less mental stimulation. Reading, yes, it's great for, I think, for our mental activity. The only problem with reading is that we're always sitting down with doing it. And I love reading myself, but, you know, we sit, of course, when we read. So if you want to, one option is to maybe switch to audiobooks, which you listen to while you go for a walk. That could be a great option to alternate, still listening to your book, well, you know, listening to it then, but you'll be at the same time, you're physically active. And sorry, there was another question? I can't remember now. This is my memory failing me.
Yeah, the other question is meditation helpful for brain?
Oh yes, meditation, yes. So meditation, yeah, is really great. I think in general, so mindfulness, there's very good evidence, actually, scientific evidence, that mindfulness really helps with de-stressing us. And so, for example, mindfulness in particular for carers or people of dementia is really, there's very good evidence that it really shows to reduce carer burden and care. Whether it really reduces our risk for dementia, there's really, so far, to my knowledge, no scientific evidence. But in general, for our mental well-being, and of course, as you know now, that's a really important factor, there's really good evidence that meditation helps. So I think if you can do it, definitely do it. There's no harm to it.
And I know with you know, meditation, COVID must have had a big impact on people's just healthy lifestyle in general. Have you heard of or seen any studies on the effects of COVID and isolation on people's health and well-being?
Yes, so there's been now a few studies. There are no, to my knowledge, there are no specific studies for dementia, so people with dementia and COVID, but there are some ongoing, I'm aware of. But in general, for healthy people, yes, it has, what we see, it has pretty much split the population, but not in a good way, I think. So there is a small minority who basically used the COVID to become much more physically active, become much better in their health. But the majority of us, unfortunately, went the other way. We went actually less active because we were staying much more at home. Of course, we were socially isolating, so we had much less social interaction. And therefore, it's not surprising we see across many countries an increase in mental health conditions. So long term, this is really clearly an issue we need to be aware of. And social isolation is known to be really poor. And the relationship of today is a much stronger recognition these days that our mental health impacts also our physical health. And that's a really important thing to remember. So we need to have good mental health to also have physical health and vice versa. So I hope after COVID we can rebound after this, but it will have had a significant impact. And the studies so far, they bear that out for healthy people. As I said, for dementia, people with dementia, we don't know yet, but we assume from what we hear that it's even worse for people with dementia being isolated.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, someone had mentioned something about brain supplements. Do you have any
nutritional supplements? Yes. Yeah.
Have those, do you have any comments on or feedback about that?
Yes, so this is a very quite controversial topic still, actually, I should say. That's why I didn't mention it. So what we always say is that if you want to take supplements, yes, fine, I think you can do it, but just be a bit careful. The supplement industry is not as regulated as the medication industry. And so many people can make big health claims which might not be true. And also what's within the pills in the supplements varies hugely, basically. So how much you're actually getting this, and that's a really kind of critical factor. Now, in terms of dementia prevention, so far supplements have shown mixed results for dementia risk reduction. So far we're not recommending it, but many people take them just prophylactically, and I think it's a personal choice, obviously, if you want to do it. But just be careful in terms of the ingredients and the health promises these supplements do. What most dietitians would tell you is that if you eat a healthy, balanced diet, you do not need any supplements. So that's the key message.
Perfect. Nan, did you have, I think maybe one or two final questions?
Sure. So somebody asked that their loved one has cardiovascular disease, and later on they're diagnosed with mild vascular dementia. So can there be a link between vascular disease and dementia? Can one lead to the other, and whether medication plays a role?
So yes, so this is really what I meant. I think a lot of this is the cardiovascular risk, exactly, that people, if they have cardiovascular health, then yes, this will increase our risk for dementia. And the reason is that it really affects our blood supply to the brain, which affects our the oxygen and the sugar, the blood sugar, which reaches our brain. And that can basically accelerate the dementia process. But I think if once they have this diagnosis, if it's well regulated with medication and they're trying to stay quite active, then usually it should not increase their risk for dementia further. But if it's unregulated or undiagnosed, then that's the really dangerous bit. But if it's well regulated and they see their doctor and take their medication regularly, then it should again account for their risk.
And thank you. And you know, especially in Montreal, people speak many different languages. So we have French, we have English, and so forth. So sometimes people want to know exactly if people are struggling coming up with the right word because they know two languages. Would this be kind of the early signs, in your opinion, about, maybe, mild cognitive impairment, or would this just be, the words are on the tip of their tongue?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are actually some really interesting studies which have come out that actually bilingualism is actually reducing our risk for dementia. So it keeps our brain actually much more active. So you in Montreal are definitely far better off than we are here. So lucky you, I would say. But if you forget the occasional word, I would not worry about this. I think it's really that just happens all the time. And I think our brain, in general, our brain ages and our memory might not be as good as it was. And we might look for the occasional word, but it comes back to us. But if we have really repeated issues of finding words or getting the languages confused with each other, then there is clearly a much bigger issue. I see this sometimes as well. It's very interesting that people say, for example, very often immigrants, of course, they say, oh, I have all these problems in English, but in my mother tongue, I'm still perfectly fine. And this is another issue. But very often then if we get an interpreter in, they are actually as poor in their mother tongue as they are in the immigrant language. It's really just a perception that people have, I think, very often.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. And when in doubt, I'm assuming just speak to your GP
Absolutely.
or your family doctor or someone like that.
Exactly. Just don't be too worried about it. I think this is the thing. People get so concerned about their memory, but the occasional memory slip is perfectly fine. It's just part of our healthy aging process, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Dr. Hornberger, thank you so much for reminding us of things that we should be doing
Yes.
or continue doing, depending on who you are. I think that there's a big concern about being diagnosed with dementia, and everyone wants to stay healthy as they age and move into retirement and so forth. So thank you for shedding some light on this. I really appreciate it. What actually makes me proud is that we at AGI, we actually have a dance therapy program and also a yoga for caregivers program that are actually they happen online. So it's easily accessible for families. So if you are interested in any of these programs, you can just contact our office and we can get you physically active within the next week, no excuses. So thank you, Dr. Hornberger, again. There will be, for those of you who are attending, there will be a survey sent out by the end of the day to give some feedback on their satisfaction of these lectures over the last week. And if you want access to speak to a counselor or more services, please don't hesitate to call. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon, Dr. Hornberger.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye.